What's up, everyone? Connor O'Hanlon here for another episode of the Greater Society podcast. And today I am joining you in a pre recorded version of the midterm prediction video because I am actually not home today. I'm actually down in South Carolina. So, because of that, I have pre recorded this and we are going to be looking at key Senate races specifically and key governor's races and predicting the outcome of what will happen in this election cycle. I want to first say, if you are watching this and it is before November 8th, please do whatever you possibly can to get out and vote. You have the time. Volunteer. You can volunteer at the polls. Specifically, if you are in Pennsylvania, you can work at the polls outside. You can volunteer to do that. You can get paid to work on the inside. I don't know if there's certain places that still need poll watchers on the inside or poll workers on the inside. Do be on the lookout for that. And I don't mean poll watchers as in certifying the election. We'll talk about that before the end of this episode, I'm sure. But more so like getting people in to vote, processing, all that stuff. Some places might be in need of help. And the last thing is, if you can volunteer and spend time knocking doors, making phone calls, texts, all that stuff. I mean, phone calls and texts are less effective. But of course, if you can knock some doors and whatnot, please do so. And if you do, and it doesn't matter, what candidate you're doing it for. Ideally for us, we want progressive candidates and supporting Democratic progressive candidates. But if you feel so obliged, take a picture or a video of yourself. Make sure you tweet it out there. Tag the candidate. You can tag me for all I care, and I'll share it as well. And make sure that you are lifting up other people's voices and candidates that are specifically fighting for working class people, unlike many of the people we will be talking about today. So, with that being said, this is I've done this, I guess, show for almost 2 years in different forms, the old version of the show and this version of the show. So this is my first election preview videos where I will give my predictions. Hopefully I am wrong on some of them, because we will talk about the trend of all this too as we go through. But yeah, there are some good signs and there are some bad signs. I'm looking, just so we're all on the same page as we go through this, I'm using 538 as the polling outlet. I'm not using 538's predictions, although some of them probably will align. I am not of the mindset that pure data-driven polling is accurate at this time. Not that it's not accurate, but let's just be clear. There have been anomalies enough of the time in the last 2 years because of the change in pandemic voting, the change in the realignment of parties, the way that independents vote, whatever it may be. It doesn't seem that the exact same models can work as they did before. That is not to say that projections like this are wrong based on polling. I am going to use polling and kind of my gut feeling to kind of roll through some of this stuff and figure out where we see fit. But I just want to say that up front, you can't believe every poll you see. You can't believe an aggregate of polls and take that as gospel. We talked about this a few weeks ago, but my main gauge as to I'm pretty sure that this person's going to win is when they have over 50% in a poll, or not a poll, in an aggregate of polls. Because at that point, it seems to be more likely than not that they have the majority that they need or the plurality that they need. There are different electoral systems throughout, so again, take that with the caveat as well. But with that being said, we're going to start with Senate, then we're going to look at governor's race. I'm not going to look at specific House races because of just the pure amount of them, and frankly, and I'll talk about it first, actually. The House of Representatives is seemingly like we have a majority of analysts and polling outlets have kind of shifted to say that the House is going to be more than likely taken by the Republicans, which historically, if you know anything about, American politics in the 90s and the 80s, I mean, really in the 70s as well, from basically like the New Deal era forward, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives for almost 40 years at some point. And, some claim it to be, whatever, gerrymandering or whatever. Gerrymandering exists now. It did exist back then, but not nearly to the same extent and effectiveness that it does now, because the majority of people vote Democratic. You will see that this election cycle as well. However, the way that the seats are carved up, and the seats in the Senate as well, because each state has 2 senators, but that is more justifiable on some level because that's just how the system is made. It's just each state has 2. But the House of Representatives, they're carved up into little, weird shapes to make them more winnable or less winnable by one candidate or another. So, since the 90s, basically, there has been the flipping, the flopping of the House back and forth, which is kind of what you would want, in theory, in a functioning democracy, assuming that we had 2 parties that cared about democracy equally. But this is a false equality, a false parity here because of gerrymandering and because of gerrymandering is the functioning reason why, and it puts an undue weight to certain places that maybe have fewer people, and certain places have been carved up to exclude, and they do this rather carefully on some level, but to avoid impacting the Civil Rights Act and to avoid, basically being too overtly based on race, they carve things up, and by they I mean specifically Republicans in power following census, to make it more beneficial for them to win. Now, in Pennsylvania, we actually got a better map for our state house and our state senate, but that is not necessarily the case for federal Congress. And that is despite, like New York, we have a risk of losing Democratic seats. I'm sure in California, there's a risk of losing Democratic seats. Like, these are the places that you wouldn't really expect to have that issue. There are leaders in the Democratic Party that are at risk because of this, despite their own decisions in the process, let's say. All of that being said, most signs right now are not looking good for the House of Representatives for Democrats. And again, I hope that I am wrong, but almost every indicator that I'm looking at, and I don't have insider polls beyond what I've heard anecdotally from campaigns, locally, and that's not even helpful at this point because I know what happened in 2020. So for me, this election cycle has to kind of prove that the modeling has been changed, has been adapted, and see, okay, well, how much does Roe play into this? And I think that decision, the overturning of Roe, could possibly, I'm putting this in quotes, save Democrats both in the Senate and the House, because in certain districts, take PA01, where I live, the demographic that might swing the election is middle class or upper middle class, suburban, white women with a college education. I mean, that's like hyper specific, but if you look at the indicators of a lot of people guessing, like, okay, what is going to be the deciding factor? What group of people might have, an impact on these elections? That is a lot of, and this happens, frankly, those voters are the same ones that are going to be flipping the Senate as well. If Fetterman to win, and we will discuss that in a second too, but if Fetterman versus Oz, those are the voters that will basically make or break Ashley Ehasz versus Brian Fitzpatrick. Those are the same voters that will make or break Fetterman versus Oz. And those races are not connected necessarily. And again, there's different reasons for that. And House races are complicated because the dynamics of where they are. Because of locality, you have hyper local issues and hyper local relationships, let's say, that people have with their elected official or the candidate, or, maybe they have a specific state rep or state senator that they really love, but they want to split their ticket. I mean, there's so many little things that add up on the smaller scale of the election. The smaller the election, the more toss up there is. But based on all the polling right now, based on the aggregate of polls, based on the trends, based on my gut feeling too, because this is kind of going to shade, I think, the rest of this episode. I don't feel dread or fear, let's say, but I don't feel great, and I don't feel hyper confident going into November 8th that the Democrats will hold either house. But I think if I were to pick one that the Democrats will hold on to, it would be the Senate at this point. We will discuss why that is in a second, but the House seems like the messaging has been muffled and it has been covered up by these big races and the dripping down of like the large races down into them. I mean, again, not to hyper analyze, Pennsylvania necessarily for this episode, because we do that all the time, but it's rare for me to see. I saw my first state rep ad for, technically I'm not in the district, but for the 143rd, which is Gwen Stoltz versus Shelby Labs. I actually saw the Republicans ad last night for the first time. And, I saw in the 29th, the district that I live, I seen that. I actually never saw Tim Brennan or Diane Smith's ads on TV, but my dad did. He saw it for Tim Brennan once. So, I mean, the saturation of the markets for these state reps, state senate, House of Representatives, it's just blown out by the big money in the governor's races and the Senate races. And again, maybe where you live, it might not have the same money poured in. Bucks County is just a bellwether for the rest of Pennsylvania. So for the most part, if it's close, then you can kind of guess from there. But on election night, PA01 and Bucks County both will be in the spotlight. And if Ashley Ehas is coming through and going to win, which I hope she does, I don't have polling that suggests one way or the other on that because of the impact of Roe. Who knows what that possibly could be? I'm genuinely hopeful that she's, if not going to win, come close. So that is something that I'm looking forward to. But in reality, the Democrats holding the majority in the House doesn't seem likely at this point. Now, I'm going to start with some Senate races. I think I have 2, 4, 6, 8 that I'm looking at in particular. These 8 will shade our perceptions on who we think is going to win here. So let's start with in Florida. And I know that's probably not that big, so we'll go here. And there we go. Hopefully that's big enough for you. So this is in Florida, where Marco Rubio is the incumbent, and he is running against Val Demings. And actually, from watching other political commentators, from watching the debates, from watching reactions to clips from Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, everywhere that I kind of gauge where people react to things, TikTok even, Val Demings did very well in her performances in the debates, and she probably helped herself pretty well in doing so. But the polling has suggested that over time the gap is growing wider, that the most reliable polls show Marco Rubio holding a 5 to 10 point lead. And a 5 to 10 point lead when you're over 50%, as these top two polls here say. I know that's horrible to see when I'm highlighting it, but this top one from Data for Progress has a B rating from 538, so that's just based on their accuracy and the size of the poll, the sampling data, whatever. I could go into my statistics class if you really wanted to and explain a little bit more of it, but for our sake, a B has him at 51% and Deming's at 44%. Again, over 50%. And then the University of North Florida poll, the A or B rating, has it at 54% Rubio, 43% Demings. And these are the most recent of these polls as well. So who knows? I don't live in the market. I haven't seen any crazy October surprises. I haven't seen anything happen in the last week or two that would make me think that this would flip. And in the projections that I've seen, it doesn't look too good for Val Demings. You can go back and look at my reaction to the debate back, 2 or 3 weeks ago. And even then, I particularly wasn't blown away by Val Demings' performance, but a lot of people have been. Supposedly, she's been running a really good campaign. She's outperforming Charlie Crist, who is running, and we will cover that in the governor's side, she's outperforming him, and she's definitely getting more attention. But, and we will also talk about this with Georgia, we can also talk about it in Pennsylvania. The governor and Senate race together requires some level, not necessarily of coordination, but of mutual aid in a way, where it's like you need a great campaigner to lift up both sides. And by both sides, I don't mean Republican and Democrat. I mean by governor and senator, because these are the top of the ticket, right? So if you have, it's like in a presidential election. If you don't have a dynamic, charismatic leader on the ticket for president, which again, that's not why we should be voting for people like that, but it does matter. It does make a difference that if you have someone like Barack Obama who has charisma and is going around campaigning and getting out there like he's going to be out there with Joe Biden on November 5th in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, and even on the other side of it, right? If you have Donald Trump who creates the narrative, who puts things out there, who drives the news cycle, if you don't have that, and you're running in the state with DeSantis on the ballot, that's really a tough situation. So, I hope maybe that Val Demings runs for something down the line. Maybe she could run for governor when DeSantis tries to run for president and he does something crazy. Who knows? But she seems to be a good candidate. But she's just in a tough situation given that, Marco Rubio is not particularly liked either, especially nationally at this point. Marco Rubio doesn't even seem like he's trying at many times. He seems like he's just given up since Trump whooped his butt a couple of years ago, which is odd. It's odd to see it like that. But he kind of he comes and asks for the Trump endorsement and he gets it, and he does all the things that you would expect. So being an incumbent, it is hard to overturn, and the trends are all leaning to the Republicans. So if you ask me today, the race would be for for Rubio, which I wish that it was for Demings, but that's what I get while I'm trying to transition back and forth. But yeah, as of today, it looks like Demings is in trouble, and that's unfortunate. The next seat, which also sucks to cover, is Ohio, where you have J.D. Vance running against Tim Ryan. And this one I don't feel as bad about as the predictions on 538 do. But given that I felt even 2 weeks ago stronger than I do now. And maybe it's the pessimist that has been growing in me as I've gotten closer to elections, where I've seen it hands on. I've lost elections myself by the smallest of margins possible, where some of the, and I didn't have polling, but like you have a gut feeling. And JD Vance is like kind of a clown, so it's weird to have it so that Tim Ryan is behind. But, and I will also talk about this quickly, but Tulsi Gabbard's coming out and supporting JD Vance. Like, what the? But besides the point, Tim Ryan ran a good campaign, has run a good campaign, and his messaging has been strong for Ohio. And I think there are things that, of course, that I wish candidates ran more on, leaned into more. I think Democrats could have hammered more, and maybe in the last week they will hammer more on Social Security and Medicare, protecting basic rights for people, making sure that we're fighting for the working class, middle class, elderly, veterans, etc. Those, like union jobs, all that good stuff, right? That is kind of the lane that Tim Ryan fits in, specifically the labor aspect. That's like a strong Ohio / Western Pennsylvania strategy. If you're looking just at strategy, I'm hoping he actually believes it, but I'm saying just from a electoral strategy point, that seems to be the right thing. But in 2016 and in 2020, Donald Trump won Ohio both times. And not particularly close. I remember in 2016, and when I was in high school, Mr. Weaver, my Central Bucks West teacher for social studies, basically used to tell us, how Ohio goes is how the election goes, which it didn't in 2020, but it did in 2016. So when 2016, it was not even late in the night, and Ohio was called for Trump, that was a big deal, and Florida as well. So these two states are kind of the same. Where some states are moving blue, I'd say like Pennsylvania has like a more of that blue moving streak. Florida and Ohio have that red moving streak. And even Wisconsin, you could look at and say it has a blue moving streak. Florida and Ohio are moving to the right, moving to the Republican. And, of a lot of these races, I do wish that like we could get Tim Ryan in there, because I think having him in this seat would be meaningful from Ohio, and proving, okay, we can have a Democrat in this seat and do things that kind of cross an aisle. And I do think, and I've told a bunch of people this. I had a conversation with somebody that ran for lieutenant governor on the Republican side, just last week, and he ran this year. And we had an amicable conversation, and these kind of conversations that can work and talk about middle class issues, working class issues, move beyond like the culture war nonsense. Not saying that it's not important, but move beyond like fighting over each and every little thing. Like, who cares about Mr. Potato Head? Who cares about Dr. Seuss? Who cares about that stuff? What? Who cares that Thor's a lady in the new movie? Who cares? The real stuff that matters, and the ones that we can fight about is like this type of race, where it's fighting for labor, it's fighting for working class families, it's fighting for different types of healthcare access. Again, me and a Republican aren't going to necessarily agree on how we get there, but coming up with some level of a pathway to saying, okay, you think that everyone should have healthcare, right? I do too. Let's figure out a way to get there. And I might not be able to convince them, but at least we're talking about moving the needle and moving it forward. And someone like Tim Ryan in a state like this has that ability. But as of right now, these top three polls alone have Vance up 5, Vance up 1, and an even. But you have these three are from October 14th to the 19th. Then you get to the 20th and the one above it. And then the most recent one has the shift towards JD Vance even bigger. Now, I don't think it's going to be a 5-point win for JD Vance, but I don't think that Tim Ryan's going to pull it off. I do think, if I had to put money on it, that JD Vance would have it. And that's two of these key races that will determine the outcome of the Senate here. So it is something we have to look at, hope for. Maybe he can pull it out, but I would not be surprised to see him not pull it off, unfortunately. But let's take a look at the next one, which is Wisconsin. And in Wisconsin, we have Ron Johnson, who's the incumbent, versus Mandela Barnes. And this one's also not good. But I'll state this up front. If there was a race to have a Democratic upset, as in like a pro-Democratic upset, Wisconsin is it. I said this before on the program, but if you remember, let me see. I'm not gonna quickly search it because that's just a waste anyway. But I'll just tell you the story. If you remember, back in 2015, 2016, I don't remember if it was actually in 2016. I think it has to be within 2016, just based on the primary. But in 2016, you had the race between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. And Bernie was down big time in the polls, like double digits. And he outperformed every single poll and won Wisconsin. I'm not necessarily saying that's likely to happen here. I'm not saying that, like, oh, of course, every time they run a poll in Wisconsin, it's just wrong. That's not the case. Although these polls have Ron Johnson over 50, the most recent ones that are rated high. But it seems that Wisconsin has this blue streak that comes out and votes and mobilizes, and Wisconsin has same-day voter registration. So if you have people that mobilize, organize, get people out to vote, convince them, and get them there, it can happen. Again, might not be likely to happen, but with Biden winning in 2020 in Wisconsin, it does give you that hope, that like little kernel of hope. And Ron Johnson, remember, is somebody that was pushing the January 6th stuff to the nth degree. I mean, he was actually trying to do something with Mike Pence, trying to get him to overturn. He was like sending somebody that an intern sent to him. He was giving information to the vice president to go and overturn the election because of. So like, he is a seemingly a true believer. It's not like he's not, believing in what he says. He does. And that's kind of the scarier part. But he is one of the most radical Republicans that I can think of in the Senate. And unfortunately, from what I can tell on the outside, because Mandela Barnes is lieutenant governor and during 2020, all this stuff, he's been conflated and thrown in with this rhetoric of crime, like we have here in Pennsylvania, that they talk about over and over and over and over and over again, creating their narrative, which again, maybe Democrats can learn from this, hopefully, but not have to lie about it or not have to really disproportionately blow out statistics to make our point. We can just make the point and create the narrative the same way on the other side. But this seat does look like Ron Johnson's going to hold it. Key point here is that these seats so far have been, and I'm pretty sure. Let me double check. I don't think that Ohio has does not have a Republican incumbent, but I would like to check that just in case that I am wrong, or I'm just throwing it out there. Yeah, so Ohio has a Republican incumbent. He's not running, but that's important to note. So all three of these are not Democratic losses, even if they lose. They are just Republicans holding the seats that are up, and Democrats have more seats up for election. But yeah, I mean it's still not good. Let's see. We have North Carolina, where we have Bud and Beasley, and I'll transition over here, where we have, which I haven't heard that much about this race, other than the fact that the guy that is running for the Republicans, Bud, is my understanding is that he is again, an election denier and has flip flopped back and forth over time in the last couple of months or weeks. And this was supposed to be, and I mean, we can see all the different trends here, but this was supposed to be one of those elections that could go either way. North Carolina not being particularly one of the most red states known, but even 538 has it 80-20, and it seems like the chances where you don't, if you're not leading in any of the polls, that's pretty bad. And to somebody that is an election denier, it's pretty bad. So again, the only hope that we can look at here is that the trend is not getting bigger; it's actually getting smaller. So again, if we're looking at an upset race, Beasley could pull this off. I wouldn't put money on it because again, look at all this. Now, if in the next 3 or 4 days the polls change between this episode coming out and Tuesday, and it starts to show, okay, Beasley has a slight win or slight lead, that might be the key to flipping that seat and keeping that Senate majority. But I wouldn't exactly I wouldn't put money on it based on these polls right here. An even poll is pretty good though. I would not shake my head at that. Next, we're going to look at Arizona. And Arizona has Mark Kelly versus Blake Masters. And this is a Democratic seat. Remember that. This is important to note. This is a must-win seat for Democrats. And I'm going to call it right now and say that Mark Kelly holds on. It is not they're not going to be a gigantic win. Remember that Kyrsten Sinema is also from Arizona and has made Mark Kelly's job a lot harder. Mark Kelly, I believe, was an astronaut, and he is running against Blake Masters, who is a out-and-out Trump supporter. Again, all these people in these close races are not necessarily these old school, whatever you want to call them, Reaganite Republicans. Are not, even George W. Bush, for every, issue that we had with them. These all are Trump sycophants. And maybe the least of so far has been Marco Rubio. And Marco Rubio has fallen right in line with Trump every single time. So this rating has Kelly up on every single thing. So take what I just said about North Carolina, bring it to this. Having Blake Masters not winning any of them is good for us. And I would say it's funny. I get Blake Masters and JD Vance mixed up a lot because of they're very similar in their approaches. And by approaches, I mean, bootlicking Donald Trump. But, Mark Kelly, he's only over 50% once here. Now, this is a strong poll, a strong rated poll, A+. But remember, this is one poll. An aggregate of polls has him leading, right? So if you look at the aggregate here, it's probably about between a 2.5 and 3% lead. This 6% is a big outlier, but that is a recent poll as well. But it is an outlier. Remember that. So it's not going to be a blowout, but it will be. That is my prediction that we will hold on this seat. So far, it's a wash in picking up these seats. But we can look at now. I don't know. I'm gonna save this one for last. We can look at Nevada, where we have Adam Laxalt and Catherine Cortez Masto. And here we have a real genuine toss-up. But this is a Democratic seat. This is also a must-win seat for Democrats. This is not like we can lose this seat, but we'd be okay because we're going to win here. This is one of those seats that if we lose, we're done. This is my opinion. This is my prediction. The same I'll say with Georgia. These holding these seats is the only way that we get to hold a majority. Because if you can't tell already by the way that I'm predicting these, it's going to be a 50-50 or a 51-49. I don't think either party, unless it's a blowout somehow, just out of the blue, no party is getting 52 senators here. I don't think. This poll, I mean, these aggregate of polls with an even split, it goes back and forth, right? Where you have the New York Times having the A+ here, has it even. And again, this is actually one of the, it's interesting to note. Maybe it's because I'm on the East Coast, but this is one of those elections that has not gained the same level of attention that many others you would have expected to have because of the importance of the state. And again, Nevada is not like this liberal bastion or this, conservative haven. It is that kind of like, it goes both ways. You have a bit of like a weird mixture of people. And weird, I mean, kind of good in a good way. It is like a Western state that has different geographies, different interests, let's say. I mean, you have Las Vegas in there, but you also have very rural areas. And those splits like that, the same way that Pennsylvania has, makes predicting these things extremely hard. Now, I would guess that we hold this seat. But, hold on as I'm choking to death. Hopefully that's not a bad omen, but I think we hold this seat. But, like I said, if we're going to lose one, and it's a telltale sign, and it's like the key race that we're going to win or lose, this is the Democratic defense, same with Georgia, that has to be won if we're going to hold the Senate come January. But my prediction here is that Catherine Cortez Masto will win. Now, don't take it. If you're in Nevada and you're watching this somehow, please make sure that you get out and vote and actually do that, because 538 does not believe the same thing that I am saying. And that is because of the trend in national movements right now. Because of the tide in the media, because of different whatever, I guess the media, I mean, really the media narrative is really driving this right now, the advertising, and you'll see it across wherever you live. The Republicans kind of back up a dump truck of funds right at the end of every election and just pour it in. I mean, Dr. Oz now is seeing a giant pouring of money that he didn't see before. And we need this seat if we're going to hold it. So the next thing to look at is Georgia, which before we go, I'll just show it to you because it might be worth looking at here while I'm trying to not die of choking here, is what 538, Nate Silver, and them think, the model that they're running. This is a devastating number to look at because Herschel Walker in these projections wins 53 out of 47% of the time for those listening. However, the way that Georgia works, you remember last year, you have to get over 50%. And if you look, it's funny because I actually didn't look at these specific numbers before. I looked at the average, but neither of them are over 50% in any of these polls, Warnock or Walker. We talked about, Walker's scandals. We talked about how he, has no real qualification to be a senator. He was a football player. His illegitimate children, while talking about, and that's no judgment if you are not like a giant asshole about it. But if you're going to be LARPing about, conservative values and the family unit and the nuclear family, and, he's talking about banning abortions, and yet pays for an abortion, tries to get another abortion, has these children out of wedlock, he's an absentee father, all of this stuff. And he's running against Reverend Warnock, who then he goes and tells him that he has to read the Bible. And like, there's so many different stories about this election and the dynamics here. But this is devastating to look at because Herschel Walker is leading in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these polls. Warnock leads in 1, which is the highest rated one, I'll note. And it's the most recent one. But that is one poll. This is why I'm scared. This is why I am not, it's not dread and it's not happiness. It's not like, great cockiness coming in saying, oh yeah, we got this. I'm going to say that Warnock wins. I actually think that there's a chance that this goes to a runoff election. And there will be a 1-month sprint yet again to who controls the Senate for this last seat. And it might be 50 Republicans and 49 Democrats, and this seat might be the one that makes it 50-50 or 51-49. For God's sake, if you live in Georgia, I'm going to be in Georgia this week as well. For God's sake, please vote. And please vote for Warnock. This is going to be the one that everyone watches because it's crazy. It's crazy that this is that close. I will note on a positive that Biden won Georgia in 2020. Warnock and Ossoff both won in 2021 in the runoff in January. So that is why I'm going to say Warnock wins. There's going to be, let's just say the wins of history are coming in and just making sure that we get people out to vote. But it seems that, and we can talk about it on the other side, that, and I'm only going to look at a number of governor seats because there's so many, but also they kind of tie. You can look at, while I'm here, actually, I'll just do it. All right. So we'll just take a quick hop on over to the governor's side where we're going to go to Georgia. And in Georgia, you have Stacey Abrams, which is this is also scary. This is like actually scary to think about. Being beaten by Brian Kemp by 5, 10, 7, 8, 7, 7, 7, 9. And Stacey Abrams kind of revolutionized the new turnout methods for Democrats across the state. I mean, across the state and across the country, has been emulated by multiple. I mean, we did it here in Bucks. And if she is struggling to pull people up and vote in her race, which at this point doesn't seem like she's going to win, then this Warnock race here, this becomes even scarier when you say, okay, well, he's only winning in 1 by 3. You have 3, 5, 2, 2, 4 for Walker. But combined with the average of pretty much 8.5% for Kemp, that is that is a bad mixture. That is a really bad mixture, and it's the complete opposite of what you need to see to flip this seat, because of course this is a Republican seat. Brian Kemp, remember, he was the one being pressured by the Trump administration at the time and the election officials in Georgia to flip it. And of course, Brian Kemp was the Secretary of State when he ran against Abrams previously. He had control of certain aspects of the election that made it harder for people to vote, which again, that's why Stacey Abrams ran on fixing a lot of that stuff. But this is a seat, unfortunately, I think that we're not gonna get. And that's unfortunate. Very unfortunate, I'd say. And if you look at this, I'm hoping this at least goes to a runoff. But I think Warnock can pull it off. Money in the last minute is going to shift. We're going to start seeing major shifts in where resources are put. Hopefully, this seat and this seat, which now we're going to shift over to my home state, most likely your home state if you're watching this, Pennsylvania. And yeah, this is a tough one to talk about because it obviously hits home. But I had no idea the impact of, I don't think anyone really did, the impact of having a stroke would have on John Fetterman's campaign. Now, I'm voting for John Fetterman. I think you should too. I met him. He stands for democratic values, he stands for progressive values. But I think that it is hard, and I'm trying to be gracious towards the people that I'm talking about here. There are people that just will they'll try to be educated voters. They will listen to the debate, which we didn't cover the debate. I was painting a friend's business, was helping them. But I listened to the debate while doing that, and it was not good. And these polls are, let me double check myself here. Yeah, these polls are pretty fresh from the debate, right? So the debate was last Tuesday, which was the 25th. So these include the days before and after the debate. And the ones after have Oz winning. The message has been crime, 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 inflation, crime. For those that might recall, I had, State Representative Brian Sims on my old program for old heads of the Connor O'Hanlon experience. And Brian talked to me about the job of lieutenant governor in Pennsylvania. And one of the jobs that the lieutenant governor has is to sit on the pardons board for the state. And specifically, John Fetterman has done a good job at looking at nonviolent drug offenders, and as any good person that wants to believe in restorative justice would, help them with their sentence, help them make suggestions for pardon, help them whatever, right? Readjust into life. But this has been blown out of proportion and changed. The message has changed into saying, oh, John Fetterman said he could probably get rid of 1/3 of people in prison, meaning that non-violent drug offenders that are in state penitentiary or whatever, in jail. And then they changed it to saying, well, no, actually, he's talking about murders and rapists and all this other stuff. And that's what they're running on. And it just doesn't help And there's nothing that like can be done at this point. It doesn't help that John is recovering, so he can't necessarily proactively beat the message. He can't proactively create the message the same effective way that he was doing in the primary. And I say this as somebody that is friendly with Malcolm Kenyatta, who ran against John and who is actively campaigning extremely hard for John. But it's hard to be the one making the message when when the candidate is the one that is not necessarily able to, lead the charge. And it freaking sucks to say this, because I've been following Fetterman for 7 years at this point. I met John when I was in college. I was in 2015. And I voted for him in the primary in 2016. And I was excited to vote for him again. I am excited to vote for him again. But Jesus, this is so much closer than it had to be. This is so much closer than it should be. And another reason that if you are not from Pennsylvania and you're watching this, that from someone in the swing county, in a swing area, in the swing county, in the swing state, this is going to be closer than I thought it was. I was so much more confident that Fetterman was going to beat Oz than Shapiro was going to beat Mastriano, which I'll jump to in a second. But my feelings are completely flipped. I feel the total opposite of that right now. I feel like Shapiro has it and Fetterman is in a toss-up. I'm going to say here and right now that Fetterman wins, and I freaking hope that I'm right. But it's going to be a 2 to 3% win. It's not going to be a blowout the way that, just if you go back and listen to an old episode when I had Sam Mashi on, when Fetterman was up 8, 9, 10%. That's not the case anymore. I think we all have to learn a lesson from this race and realize how important, and this is not knocking John. Remember this. Like, I am saying this wholly up front. I support John Fetterman. I am voting for him. But it's important to note that it's vital for the candidate to be the one that leads the charge on the messaging. Because as many surrogates and all this stuff that you can get, Obama's coming, Biden's coming, you have Malcolm running all around the state, you have Val Arkush running around the state, you have so many people just pushing for John. I mean, it's just, and he's doing his best. It just freaking sucks that a medical anomaly is going to really make this a toss-up race. And God, I just hope that he is able to pull it off, take some time and rest, and just come back, fully rested and hopefully recovered, and just go from there. It really sucks to talk about this race right now. Dr. I was 2 feet away from Dr. Oz on Friday night. He came to my brother's football game, and it's a smart move. It's one of the biggest football games in the county, right? So like, I haven't seen Fetterman in the same way that I saw Fetterman in 2018 and 2020 necessarily. Well, not 2020, but 2018 specifically, where he was running for lieutenant governor, hitting every single and he is doing this. That's why I'm putting the caveat. But in 2018, it was like I'm seeing him at a house, and then here, and then there, and then a restaurant, and then this, and then that. I'm just hoping. I'm hoping that my perspective and my perception is just a little bit wrong and skewed, and that this is a safe W for us. But I don't feel as confident as I wish I did. But I do feel that there is a solid chance that he does pull it off. I'm gonna say yes, which with my predictions would lead us to, I'm gonna predict a 51-49 Democratic Senate. We lose the House, and then we can look at some of these governor's races. Now, I don't know all of these different governor candidates because they're not covered the same way. They don't impact me specifically the same way because I live in Pennsylvania. But we will start with Pennsylvania, where we have Democratic incumbent Tom Wolf being term limited out, and we have Josh Shapiro running against Doug Mastriano. So these are the poll numbers that you want to see if you are going to win a statewide election. 51, 53, 49, 54, 50. 43 is not good, but that's Rasmussen. 53, 58, which equates to plus 10, plus 13, plus 6, plus 9, plus 8, plus 3, plus 9, plus 22. The average of these leads me to believe that this, and I'll say this for those who don't know. I mean, Shapiro has run statewide for attorney general twice, and in 2020, it was a bloodbath. I mean, like, Shapiro blew out, I don't even remember who he ran against. And Shapiro is a good campaigner. He is not necessarily the, like a weird way to put it. He's not like the rabble rouser, right? Like, he's not going to be like getting every single headline. He's not, and that's good and bad, right? You don't, Shapiro is somebody that will not get himself into hot water, especially with like mainstream media. He'll get himself into trouble with like progressives, which like we have no power, right? So, and it's at a point where it's like, okay, well, when the alternative is Doug Mastriano, what compromises are you willing? And I'm not saying from a voter. I'm saying from Shapiro's perspective. What compromises as governor are you willing to take to get things done in a state that is controlled by the legislators, controlled by Republicans, House and Senate? What are you willing to compromise on to get anything done? It's actually the thing that we talk about. We have to talk about in my grad school because of the dynamics of Pennsylvania's electorate and the legislator itself. We have a chance in Pennsylvania to flip the state house and flip the state senate. I wouldn't necessarily bet. Again, I wouldn't bet on that, but it is possible that Shapiro will come into office, and I'm predicting that Shapiro wins pretty handedly, hopefully, because Mastriano is, putting it nicely, is a not sane and not rational actor. And I hope Shapiro wins. I think he's going to win if I had to call it now. And I would predict it's not going to be particularly close. So, yeah, I mean, that's actually some good, that's a good sign there. Again, we talked about Georgia, in Georgia where Stacey Abrams is down big time. We talked about Wisconsin. No, we did not actually for not for governor, but that's a really tight race as well, where you have Tim Michels and Tony Evers, where you have the polling average again, where this is a toss up. This may be impacted again by the combination, the ticket combination. So this is a really big race as well. I don't have any strong feelings in this. This 538 has Tony Evers winning 54 out of 100. I really don't have a strong opinion on that. I think it would just be it is a toss up at this point. You go to Texas, one where you are unfortunately people are seeing a giant blowout of Beto O'Rourke by Greg Abbott, and Beto Beto has his moments, right? And he's just like great sometimes, and then he's just like not so great sometimes. He's very reliant on like the viral moment, and it's Texas. I mean, statewide, it's really hard to win, and it's not particularly close. So as much as like I don't hate the idea of having like Beto O'Rourke in leadership, because he does do things properly. He does get the message out. He does proactively talk about issues. Now, again, I might not agree with everything he says, but he's out there doing it. But he is not in the realm of really reality to win this seat. And that's just another one where people were really getting hopeful that we could have somebody flip it. In Florida, we have Charlie Crist versus Ron DeSantis, where you have DeSantis up 12, 14, 11, 11, 10, 8, 10, 11. Crist was, again, one of those guys that has run statewide, and they theoretically picked the safe choice. And I put safe in quotes because this is the thing that is used against progressives over and over and over again in a seat that they will never win by running safe. This is just an unfortunate reality that this is not going to be close. Again, DeSantis and Abbott both pulling these stunts because they are posturing themselves to run for president. Most likely DeSantis more than Abbott, but both of them gunning for probably. Abbott's probably looking to get into an administration as well. That would not surprise me. Now, if we go back and let's see if we want any other governor's races that I believe are really to highlight. Whitmer in Michigan. That's important to note as well. She is somebody that you should keep an eye on. She's gonna win this seat. I have very little doubt. She's running a pretty good campaign there. And I don't even know who Dixon is. What's his first name? His or her? Tudor Dixon. Oh yes, Tudor Dixon. Trump guy. Whitmer is leading in all these polls except this top one, which is even. But I'll say this. Gretchen Whitmer, as I stumble upon it, is one of those Democratic stars, for a lack of a better term, that if Biden were not to run, and I have no indication whether he will or will not. I mean, I was just getting my haircut and I was talking to the barber about this. I have no clue, right? We have no clue. And we were talking about, DeSantis against and Trump, and how will that work out? We have no real idea of what's going to happen. And honestly, probably like days after, if not the day after November 11th or 8th, we will see 2024 kickoff. And if Biden were not to run, and if it were not Kamala, I wouldn't be shocked to see Gretchen Whitmer, Stacey Abrams, even Beto in the realm of possible choices for, running for that seat. The president, I should say. So that is something to keep an eye on. She is winning this election, if you had to ask me. She's up pretty big time all across the board there. Yeah, and for the most part, there's a lot of bigger blowout races that we just don't, there's certain ones like Vermont and again, you could look at New York, and Lee Zeldin is getting this trend of all this, but he's just probably not going to win against Hochul, the Democrat. It's weird. Again, I'm looking at Twitter and Facebook and all these places where they're just getting arbitrarily inflated in their engagement because of right-wing actors. But with all of that being said, I think this is a pretty thorough look at many of the key races. Leave a comment down below. What do you think will happen? And if I'm wrong about a specific race, which race and why? I would be happy to be wrong in the House. I'd be happy to be wrong in some of these Senate races. But stats are stats. You have to run with them, and you have to add in your gut feeling quotient into that mix. And that's how I feel about this stuff. Now, in closing, already talked about make sure you volunteer, make sure you donate, make sure you go out and vote. This last thing is important because of the time that we're living in. Be prepared to read, listen, watch, engage with media, articles, books, whatever, in the aftermath of this election. Because the likes of Donald Trump, Doug Mastriano, Herschel Walker, J.D. Vance, in the case that some of these people lose, I mean, Donald Trump's not on the ballot, but Donald Trump is already gearing up to challenge this election. And we have state representatives, state senators, governors that will be given an undue relevance in the society that we're in, given what happens after this election. And we have to be prepared, willing, and able to fight for democracy. And I don't mean necessarily physically, but to fight for our republic and our democracy and the right to vote and the right to engage with political free speech protected by the First Amendment. It's actually the most protected form of speech in America. And we need to make sure that we are able to counteract the narrative that is going to be pushed and pushed and pushed that this election was stolen, this election was fake. Oh, all these ballots came in for Fetterman overnight, not understanding that Act 77 was passed by Republicans that doesn't allow boards of election to pre-count mail-in ballots. Like, be ready. I know all this stuff in Pennsylvania, right? I don't know it for every state. I don't think anyone could. And be prepared for when you see some crazy article, some crazy tweet, to engage, not with that person necessarily, but to engage with the topic, research it, read it, watch, look it up, Google, news, reach out to somebody that you trust. There is going to be an insane amount of disinformation, misinformation. I'm just predicting that coming out of this election, leading into the 2024 election. We care about so many different issues. You know, my voting issue is Medicare for all. It's healthcare. But this election, on the bare minimum of showing up to vote, I say this as somebody that has worked as the chair. I was running in the original version of the primary of this race. I volunteered, I've donated, I've organized. You don't have to do all of that. If you can, that's amazing. I hope you do. But the least that you can do to protect our democracy and the experiment of America is to vote. I leave you with that because our democracy is at risk. Our republic is on the brink of collapse. And maybe at this point in time, the best that we can hope for is a split government rather than a completely controlled. I mean, I don't know if you guys have really thought about what the a Republican controlled state Senate and House of Representatives, not state Senate and House of Representatives will do with Biden, because we won't have another thing passed if that's the case. Even the executive orders will be thrown to the Supreme Court and thrown out. I'll leave you with that. That's a little bit of doom and gloom, but you can change that by making sure you, your family, your kids, your brother, your sister, your cousin, your mom, your uncle, anybody, your friends, vote. If you're in Pennsylvania, vote for Shapiro, vote for Fetterman, and vote for your down ticket Democratic candidates. With all of that being said, thank you so much for watching. I'm hoping next week on the program we will have good news, at least, or hope. Who knows? Again, I think that Georgia is probably going to be a interesting one, coming to possible runoff. So we will see. If you have questions, if there's anything that you need, you can reach out on Twitter at Con O'Hanlon while I'm still there and while I'm still verified. And you can follow the show on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook at Greater Society Media. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up button, leave a comment. All of that stuff helps us grow, and we've been slow and steady chugging along. You can join the Discord server by checking out the link in the description below, where you can engage with us. You can know when we go live. You can engage with me and other viewers of the program. And for as little as $5 a month, you can join patreon.com/Greater Society Media to support the program. There's nothing else I can say at this point. Please, please, please go and do your duty and exercise your right to vote. Until next time, stay safe. Peace.